So today I will speak about Confucianism and modern China. September the 28th in 1973 was the scene of a huge celebration in Taiwan, a celebration of the anniversary of Confucius' birthday. 3,000 people attended a dawn service in his honour in Taipei, presided over by the mayor, and the governor presided over a similar celebration in another city. In honour of Confucian tradition, hundreds of educators were themselves honoured on that day, and Madame Chiang Kai-shek gave a luncheon for 500 educational leaders, attended by the Vice President and the Premier. At the same time in China, this day provided an opportunity for authorities in China to attack the legacy of Confucius. Yang Yung Kuo, a professor of philosophy in China, was given a lot of media space in the People's Daily and the Red Flag. He took the view that Confucianism and communism are entirely opposed to each other, incompatible, and that therefore the former, namely Confucianism, should be extinguished. This was the view going back to Mao and the revolution. The Chinese Revolution was a real revolution in the sense that there was no evolution, and things were swept away. The Red Guards, though not established by Mao, soon received his sponsorship and encouragement, and they desecrated the tomb of Confucius as well as others. They attacked educational authorities, and school teachers were even killed, along with many others. The ultimate stripping away of Confucianism, according to which respect for teachers is of extreme importance. Hence the emphasis in Taiwan on that day, on the importance of educators, a reaction and a response which aligned with traditional Chinese culture. The old things had to be swept away, and there were four in particular. The four olds, they were called. They were old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. All had to be done away with and a new start made. Revolutions tend to want a new starting time and adopt new calendars, which quickly fade as the past reasserts itself. So it was in China. Mao denounced Confucianism as one such old culture which had held back China, suppressed women, and left elites in power strangling the country. And for many years the opposition between Marxism and Confucianism was a kind of orthodoxy, so that the incompatibility or the supposed incompatibility of the two was held to prevent any dialogue or any meeting point. I myself had a discussion in Beijing in 2004 with representatives of the International Confucian Association on just that subject of whether China was more Marxist or more Confucian. We were free to have that discussion and nobody interfered, but the association was then on the outer. Now in 2020, it has an honoured place in China. And in 2014, President Xi spoke about the contribution of Confucianism to Chinese culture. He said that Confucianism provided rational thinking and cultural achievements in building the Chinese homeland. He said that it reflected the spiritual pursuits of the Chinese nation and provided a key source of nourishment for the survival and continuous growth of our nation. Chairman Mao would have been astounded to hear this and would have been wondering where he went wrong. It is one of these amazing reversals in history, an example of the way in which history always does the unexpected, turns out differently from the way it's planned, or provides moments of complete transformation which seem to be separate from everything else that has happened. So now the Chinese government and the Communist Party are actively promoting Confucianism. They see it as a source of spiritual nourishment and of development for the Chinese people, and a decent and civilized front to present to the world. One, of course, which proclaims the antiquity and dignity of Chinese culture. And so we have the Confucius Institutes around the world which spread knowledge of Chinese language and culture and resemble the British Council or the Alliance Française. With these organisations, the British and French governments respectively seek to develop the standing of the language and culture of their own countries. So the Confucius Institutes attempt to do the same, and this is China advertising herself under the brand name of Confucius, and it is a good exercise in soft power diplomacy. It takes away some of the ignorance about China and gives some insight into its language, culture, and history. This initiative, however, is difficult for universities because there are no guarantees of freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry within these institutes, nor does the university have complete freedom in the appointment of staff. They should, in my view, be outside the universities for these reasons, perhaps in the town and even with university articulations, by which I mean that some of the courses could be recognised for credit in a university, particularly courses in Chinese language, for example. But a number of universities in Western countries have cancelled their agreements with the Ministry of Education in China, which runs them. It's called Hanban, the branch of the Ministry of Education. But turning the face of Confucius towards the West not only speaks to China's continuous cultural tradition, but also to its concern with ethical questions. And it offers a challenge to Western individualism by representing a society governed by community and obligation rather than by individual rights. So there is a challenge to self-reflection, and the West is always hungry for food for self-criticism. The resurgence of interest in Confucianism in China in the last 2 decades is an interesting tale and seems to have begun spontaneously in the community. And so the recovery of the Confucian tradition is now, to some extent, a movement in society. Yiha Zhang points to the reading the classics movement, which began among intellectuals and ordinary people. And there does seem to be a thirst in China for some moral way, something to believe in. And the wild ride into capitalism, albeit state-controlled capitalism, led to an astounding amount of wealth creation, as well as ostentatious displays of wealth and also conspicuous consumption. Under these conditions, a kind of nostalgia for the ancient ethical ways seems to have begun to develop. It should be noted that in the same conditions are very conducive to the rapid expansion of Christianity in China, which is indeed occurring. So the Communist Party seems to have understood the social movement and chosen to try to conjoin it to its political purposes, hence the energetic pursuit of soft power through the huge investment in the Confucius Institutes. Tse-Tung, in his article, points out that some opponents of the revolutionary regime ended up in Hong Kong as they were unhappy with the authoritarian approach of Chiang Kai-shek, but most ended up in Taiwan. But in both cases, in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, Confucianism was promoted in exile, so to speak. The Chinese in exile developed and strengthened their own knowledge of the Confucian tradition, and this began to flow back into China itself, from both Hong Kong and Taiwan. So that now the voice of neo-Confucians is heard. And within China there are exponents of the Confucian way who comment freely on contemporary political trends and make recommendations on the way in which contemporary politics could be improved in the Confucian direction, just as Plato recommended an ideal republic to his fellow Athenians in the 5th century BC. So modern Confucian scholars are recommending ideal political models to their fellow citizens. These tend to be oligarchic in character, just as Plato's recommendations were, but this is not out of keeping with Confucian ethics. There is a growing sense that focusing on the shortcomings of democracy on the basis of a developed Confucian standpoint has a strong future, and that the weaknesses of the Western democracies are becoming more evident, more exposed to a Confucian critique. Confucianism generally does not condemn an authoritarian state, but offers itself as a way of improving and humanizing such a state. It calls for humaneness or benevolence, and can stand up for such principles in addressing the state. But respect for authority is something held in common between both the Communist Party and Confucian thinkers. And this is compared with the Western democracies' tendency to remove the authority from time to time on the basis of popular vote, and often on the basis of widespread misconception and ignorance. The culture of duty and obligation is seen to be superior and more consistent than the rights-based individualism of the West. There is in ancient Confucianism a strong emphasis on the happiness of the people, but this is in no way to do with the rights of the people, but the skill of the ruler in establishing the conditions for such contentment. There are clues as to how this should be achieved by public works which benefit the whole people, by participating in the rituals showing duty and obligation, and it's impossible not to notice the importance of the management of water in these recommendations about good governance. Thus, Confucianism does not seem to carry any inherent tendency towards democratic government, though some do say so, but it does respect authority, while at the same time stands aside from it and offers a kind of moral audit. I will conclude at this point, and we'll watch developments in China together. A book will eventually come out with all the references. Thank you for your company.